and I rise to make my contribution to the Residential Tenancy and Funerals Amendment Bill of 2024. I'm not really sure that if I can say much more that's not already been said by our previous four speakers. I am grateful that the member for Ovens Valley is not opposing this bill. And again, I appreciate the thoughts and words that every other member have already made in regards to this bill. The bill will make amendments to Part 4A of the Residential Tenancies Act of 1997, and these changes will bolster consumer protections for residents of residential parks. This is done through requiring Part 4A site agreements to be in a prescribed standard form with proper pre-contractual disclosure to ensure that consumers fully understand all requirements, stating that rent may be increased and providing the formula to how they calculate the rate increase. Now, I have a lot of residential parks in my electorate, and I have had quite a few people coming into my office to talk about their concerns with how the rent is calculated and how the residential village works and contracts, but I will talk about that a little bit later on. Additionally, this bill is seeking to amend the Funerals Act of 2006, which, when I read what changes are being made, I was shocked that they weren't already actually in place. The changes being made will require funeral providers to display their prices for their services and coffins and list them online and in a prominent position at the business premise. Acting Speaker, I've had the unfortunate experience of having to bury my brother and my father. And when I think back on reading this bill and think back on those experiences, I can't remember anything. You know, the fact that my brother committed suicide, so that sort of added an element of difficulty, something that I had to come to terms with. And not only me, but my mother was with me in my house in New South Wales. I had to break the news to her, and then I had to take her home to deal with this. Again, I can't remember what I did, but I must have organised the funeral over the phone, as well as flights for my family and things. It was an incredibly stressful time. It was an incredibly painful time. And the plane trip from Melbourne to Perth was Sydney to Perth was one of the longest plane flights I've ever been on, and I have flown around the world. Getting there, I remember the funeral directors were fantastic, and in fact where we had the funeral, I used to go to school with a kid called Ainsley, and his father was the caretaker of Fremantle Cemetery, and Ainsley used to have parties there at night, and they would slide down the crematory slide sometimes, but we didn't do it this time. My brother would have loved that. He did slide down, but unfortunately not in the condition we really wanted him to. I don't remember any of the details. So I understand that we need these transparency and these details to be pretty well spelt out to us. I digress when I say that I had to take my sick dog to the vet, and it was a veterinary hospital. And every time they looked at my dog, they would come out and say, you know, she's got this or that, and it's going to be another $4,000. Or they'd go back and come out and say, we need to put a drip in, and that'll be $430. And I found it sort of amusing that there was this running commentary, and I was able to take my dog to another vet that was cheaper. But you're not going to do that when you're trying to organise your brother's funeral or your father's funeral. So I certainly think being able to clearly understand what the costs are going to be and clearly understand what the service is to be provided will help a lot, because quite frankly, going into a funeral home, I don't think you're going to turn around and go out and go to another one. So I fully endorse what this bill is trying to achieve. I might also just add that within this bill there will be adding in a penalty for non-compliance and enable regulations to prescribe form and particulars for the goods and services and the coffin price list. Again, this isn't to punish funeral providers, but to give consumers another level of transparency so that they can make the best decisions for themselves. Consumer advocates like Choice have raised concerns about funeral pricing for a long time, citing the need for increased price transparency and the lack of it within the funeral industry. So again, this bill I think is going to be fantastic. One of the big surprises for me is when I went back to collect my brother's ashes, how expensive that was. And again, I had no idea. I might just add that we scattered my brother's ashes down at the port in Fremantle, at the dog beach where he used to love to go. When we went down there as a family, no one was there. And when we scattered his ashes, a whole lot of dogs appeared and played along the beach, and it was a beautiful moment. I'm a bit teary today. I'd like to talk about the Residential Park Act. So in this bill, we're making changes to the Residential Tenancies Act, which I note has been a bit of an ongoing topic over the last few years in the media. The residential park sector has witnessed significant growth, and with growth also comes increased concerns with certain aspects of residential park operations, namely issues around pre-contractual disclosure, parkside agreements not being standardised across the industry, and a lack of consumer protections. My experience with the residential parks was as a councillor for the Mornington Peninsula Shire Council, and there was a proposed residential park to go into where I live in Tyabb. And I was always a bit confused by the planning of it, because where they wanted to put the park was low density housing, and there was five 5-acre blocks, and they could only put one house on it. But for some reason with the planning scheme, you were able to put 50 houses on each 5-acre block, which kind of staggered me. I know we need housing, but still I just thought if it's low density, it's low density, but apparently not. The idea with these parks is that, and part of the planning is that the buildings can be removed within a day. I've been through some of these parks and they're really lovely, but I really don't know how you could take a building out in one day. So, but as I said, a lot of people have come to me, they've bought into these parks, they've bought into that lifestyle. I think the process of going to the parks and meeting with the operators of the parks can be really enjoyable. You'll have a coffee and maybe a white wine or something, and they'll take you around and show you the facilities, the bowling greens, and talking about how you can, have picnics and families and friends over. And I think to some extent, the true deep contractual arrangements may not be as transparent as one would like them to be. As one gentleman came to me, he liked the dream, but he said they're just bleeding him dry. So you buy a house, and there are people saying that the houses are cheaper than perhaps they might normally be. I'm not quite sure if that's true or not. But then you rent the land underneath, but you also pay fees for upkeep and other things on the park. And I had one gentleman come, and of course when you sell, you have to pay a certain percentage of the sale price of your house to the company. And I did have a couple of people come to me saying, I can't afford to live here, but I can't afford to leave. And I think at that stage in life, when you just wish to retire, enjoy the time ahead and the time left, you don't want to be fearful of the fact that you can't actually live the way you want, and in fact you may end up with nothing. So I don't think that's great, and obviously this bill will be working towards that. I also understand that there is some other research, and the Minister for Consumer Affairs announced a research review will be undertaken by the Commissioner for Residential Tenancies alongside the Consumer Policy Research Centre, and this will review Victoria's residential park sector and will engage with residents of these parks through a survey to gain further understanding of this rapidly growing industry and what changes can be made to improve the lifestyle. And I think that's incredibly welcome, and I'm looking forward to that happening, as I'm sure a lot of people in these parks are. Acting Speaker, I think I've said what I came here to say. I'm really glad that this bill is before the House today. I'm glad that it looks like everyone will be accepting of the bill, and I'm very, very happy to recommend this bill to the House.